Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about Vex, who is going to be our next upcoming champion, and speculate a little bit about what her kit might look like and what she might be like as a character in the game. Now, two caveats as to this, one of which is that I am, of course, not caught up with the Sentinels of Light story. Obviously, the buffs did go through and it's easier to make progress, but I have not caught up all the way, so if there are things that happen later on in the story that I don't know about and that I'm talking about speculating-wise, right, obviously I don't know about it, so if I'm missing anything, please let me know down in the comment section below. If anything else has been revealed about Vex or anything in those regards that I'm not familiar with, please let me know that. The other thing is that, of course, this is not the Akshan review. I know I normally do those on the Monday after the champion came out, but unfortunately haven't had a lot of time to get games in on Akshan, and in fact, he has been really bad recently, so kind of waiting to see where the buffs go and kind of waiting to give myself a little bit more time to play Akshan and maybe get that out later this week, so definitely stay tuned for that. Maybe subscribe if you guys want to see my thoughts on our newest champion. But either way, let's go ahead and talk a little bit here about Vex and what she might look like. Now, Vex was intended to come out before Akshan. In fact, that's why she is very prominently featured in the Rise of the Sentinel story, because Vex was supposed to be out by this point, right? She was supposed to be the champion, I believe, released alongside the event, and Akshan was supposed to come out a little bit later. In my mind, this would have happened very similarly to Lilia and Yone, how they both were in the Spirit Blossoms event. They came out very close to each other, but they weren't necessarily a paired champion release in the lines of Xayah and Rakan. So that's essentially why Vex has taken a little bit more time. Vex also was originally intended to be an artillery mage, and she has been changed back to being just a regular mage. To me, this means she's not necessarily a short-range mage, though I could totally see her being relatively short-range, but to me, I figure she's going to be more of a mid-ranged mage, someone like Ryze or Orianna, where they have abilities, they have a zone of threat, but they're not like going to be needing to get up close and personal in your face in order to do a lot of their damage, right? I really don't see that as being their sort of play style or her sort of play style at all. But so let's talk a little bit about the character first, because that will inform a lot of what we can get speculation-wise. And to be fair, we actually have a decent chunk of knowledge as to what the character is like because of the Rise of the Sentinels storyline. We know Vex is a bit of a moody teenager character as a Yordle, which is interesting because a lot of times Yordle characters take inspiration from real Runeterra areas, right? Poppy is very much so based off of Demacia, Kled is very much so based off of Noxus, right? It's sort of easy to see how these Yordles are fitting in with the characterization and the style of the area that they live in, right? That kind of sort of makes sense in that regard. And so for Vex, it's sort of interesting to think about where her personality came from, or where she's supposed to be associated with. You could automatically assume naturally Bandle City, but I feel like that's not necessarily the case, given that the only other Yordle we have who's sort of dark and edgy is Vhagar, and Vhagar kind of has his own reasons for being so dark and edgy, given that he worked with Mordekaiser, or rather was tutored in a time with Mordekaiser for quite some time. So in that regard, it doesn't feel to me like Vex is a Bandle City inhabitant. I could see her as actually being from the Shadow Isles, or potentially being part of the Blessed Isles before they got ruined, and then when Viego naturally showed up, and when Viego did his whole thing, Vex was like, oh, Viego's a super cool guy, and he's doing all this for love, and that sort of a thing. So I don't know, maybe that's where it comes from. Maybe Riot just decided we wanted an edgy, moody Yordle, and that's why we're going to do the things we're doing here. I don't know, but that's at least speculation as to where that might have come from and where her personality might be. The other things we know about Vex is that she does have a shadow that sort of does all of the work for her. I at the very least have not seen Vex do anything on her own. It's almost entirely been her directing her shadow to do things for her, to protect her, to slow down the enemy champions, to otherwise buy her time to escape. The fact that the shadow doesn't seem to have a will of its own, or seem to be destructible, tells me that either it's a facet of Vex, which is just sort of invincible, or maybe it's another being that she's sort of contracted to do her own thing. This wouldn't be the first time we have a Yordle with an indestructible partner. Kled's Skarl. Skarl is literally immortal and invincible. You cannot damage a Dracolops in any way, shape, or form, but of course that doesn't prevent Skarl from being a little concerned about her own well-being when it comes to a fight. So either way, it's sort of an interesting concept here, and is potential that the Shadow is actually just sort of a magical construct that's a part of Vex herself, and that's why the Shadow isn't that concerned about its own well-being, because, well, it's a part of Vex, and if Vex dies, the Shadow won't exist either, right? But the other thing to note here is that the Shadow seems to be the source of a lot of Vex's powers. right? Vex tells the Shadow what to do, and it goes and does it, which to me kind of means the Shadow might be a sort of Orianna-type playstyle or an Orianna-type kit, where Vex essentially commands the Shadow to go do things. Now, there are a couple ways this could work. The Shadow could be a very ball-like character, where Vex can control its position very discreetly and tell the Shadow specifically where to go and all her abilities cast from the Shadow. That might make her a little too similar to how Orianna acts right now, so I would be very surprised, actually, if that's the route Riot took. The other thing is it could be just sort of a particle effect that happens on Vex's abilities, similar to, if you can think of how Blinding Assault works for Quinn, where, yeah, okay, you know, it's technically Valor who's doing the attack, but realistically it's just a bird-shaped missile, right? In that regard, I could see Vex's Shadow operating in that regard, where it's sort of like, okay, yeah, this is a particle effect. It is the Shadow doing it, but this is more or less a particle effect that's revealing it. The other thing I could see is maybe a Malzahar-like passive where the Shadow occasionally protects Vex from harm. I wouldn't see it being sort of a random protection, but maybe it blocks the first instance of damage, or the instance of damage every couple of seconds, or something along those lines, or just gives Vex more resistances. That could play into a more close range-oriented Mage playstyle. I could totally see happen, especially given that Vex's kit seems very much so like she wants to block mobility, and that's sort of an interesting way to think about how these sorts of things could shape out. I don't know. It's sort of interesting to think how the Shadow might play into Vex's kit, but definitely the Shadow is going to be one of the bigger points of how Vex wants to play. The other thing to think about here is anti-mobility as it relates to Vex, as Vex's Soul kit, Riot has continuously remarked on how, you know, the new champion, the new Mage we are going to get is so mad at all these hyperactive champions who are dashing around and just wants everyone to slow down and chill out, and that would totally work for what we know of Vex's Vex's sort of character. It also works if you consider how Vex has sort of acted in the story and some of the abilities that Vex has used in the story, right? Vex, I believe, used an ability in the Freljord story where she created a huge slowing area with the Shadow that prevented all of the Sentinels of Light from chasing her down as she sort of skedaddled with the magical relic that Viego wanted. That, I think, would almost be certain to be an ability that Vex will actually have in-game. Well, like 100% that's an ability that Vex is going to have in-game, potentially her ultimate, where she creates a big slowing zone that really slows down enemy champions in the area of effect, maybe does damage over time. It could ground as well. I would be very surprised if Vex didn't have a ground on her kit, but also keep in mind that grounds are a very, very powerful crowd control ability, and especially when combining them with other types of CC like slows, it can make a sort of area of effect that you just really can't get out of, or which champions like really don't have a way of dealing with. The one way this could be sort of made a little bit weaker is if you said, you know, hey Vex, you're going to be very short-ranged, and this ability casts from your position, so you need to be in the middle of the enemy team, which is a very dangerous place for her to be, in a similar fashion to how Samira is allowed to have a Katarina ultimate that resets, and that she doesn't really have a cooldown on, right? Because she has to be in the middle of the enemy team as an AD carry, which is a very scary place for most AD carries to be, and like with Vex, a Mage's position is not normally in the middle of the enemy team in order to provide this level of sort of CC, so I could totally see that happening, but definitely there will be some degree of crowd control on Vex's kit. I would actually expect Vex to be fairly low damage across the board, but to have a lot of crowd control effects and be a very utility-based character in order to sort of play up the fact that Vex is anti-mobility and the fact that Vex just wants everyone to chill out. I wouldn't expect to see Vex have huge high moments of damage and really burst people down, but rather to be more of the sort of Mage that just hangs around and crowd controls you and generally makes your life a bad day. So it'll be interesting to see, though, what Riot end up doing with Vex, as I think that it's a very tricky kit to balance, especially when you've gone from artillery Mage to maybe something that's a little closer range. So that's why I'm expecting medium range, honestly, because artillery to medium range makes a lot more sense than going from artillery all the way to the opposite side of things and saying now you're going to be a short range champion. So I would expect Vex to be able to play at a distance, but maybe to have more of her sort of assets be close in. So we'll see how that goes. Like I said, we're still kind of trying to figure out what this champion wants to do or where she wants to play at the end of the day, and it's all speculation. So, but let me know what you guys think of Vex down in the comment section below, what you think she might have, what you think she might be able to do, and especially if there's any other details in Rise of the Sentinels that I should know about, please let me know that down in the comment section below as well. If you enjoyed the video today, go ahead and leave it a like, and if you really enjoy the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.